We're streamlining, and frankly, we can't afford to carry dead weight like you, my husband Mark declared. His tone was so glacial it sent a shiver down my spine, a coldness I hadn't known he possessed. Standing beside him, Isabel, his secretary, and, as I now knew, his mistress, wore a smug little grin that she didn't even try to hide. The conference room, usually buzzing with debate, fell into a deep, uncomfortable silence. Every single executive, people I had worked with for years, suddenly found the grain of the mahogany table or the scribbles on their legal pads utterly fascinating. I knew this moment was brewing. I had felt it in the air for weeks. The tipping point had come 3 weeks prior. I'd left my laptop charger at the office, a simple, forgettable mistake. I turned my car around and headed back after hours to get it. The building was a ghost town. The main floor dark and silent except for a single sliver of yellow light bleeding from under Mark's office door. I walked softly down the carpeted hall, not wanting to startle him if he was on a late-night conference call. Then I heard her voice. "She doesn't suspect a thing," Isabel whispered, the intimacy in her tone a physical blow to my gut. "Once your father officially signs over the company, we can finally be done with this charade." Mark's laugh followed, a low conspiratorial sound I'd never heard from him in our 14 years of marriage. Dad's little health scare was the final push we needed. The succession papers are already being drawn up. I froze, my hand hovering just inches from the door, ready to knock through the narrow gap between the door and its frame. I saw them. Isabel was perched on the edge of my husband's desk, her skirt hitched up to a scandalous height. Her manicured fingers were tracing lazy circles on Mark's chest as he stood between her legs. "And what about Chloe?" Isabel asked, her voice dripping with disdain as she pronounced my name. "She served her purpose," Mark said, his voice void of any emotion. "Dad always had a ridiculous soft spot for her, but he's not exactly thinking straight these days. The moment I'm in charge, we'll phase her out. She's been coasting on her position for years anyway." In that instant, something inside me didn't just break. It shattered the trust, the love, the entire foundation of a life I thought we had built together. But as the delicate illusion crumbled, something else, something hard and unyielding began to form in its place. I backed away from the door as silent as a shadow, leaving the charger behind. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the roads I took or the traffic lights I stopped at. When Mark came home hours later, reeking of a perfume that wasn't mine, I feigned deep sleep, my mind racing, desperately buying myself time to process, to think, to plan. Arthur's heart attack 6 months ago had been the catalyst for all of this. It was mild, the doctors said, but it sent a shockwave through our family, especially through his only son. Arthur Sterling had built Sterling Dynamics from the ground up, transforming a small lab with a big idea into one of the most respected biotech firms in the country. I had seen the immense strain of leadership take its toll on him over the years, etching deep lines of worry around his kind eyes. But I'd also witnessed his profound pride as the company achieved one breakthrough after another. Mark had worked at his father's company since he graduated from business school, groomed his whole life to one day take the helm. I met him during my very first week as a junior project manager. He was charismatic, driven, and he seemed captivated by my ideas for the company's future. Our romance was a whirlwind, and we were married within a year. Arthur had welcomed me into the family with open arms, not just as a daughter-in-law, but as a valued employee with a fresh perspective he cherished. But there was a secret, a foundational truth of Sterling Dynamics that only Arthur and I knew. I wasn't just Mark's wife or a mid-level manager. I was the silent partner, the angel investor whose initial capital injection had saved the company from collapse during a brutal downturn in its early years. The inheritance from my grandparents had been significant, and I had believed so fiercely in Arthur's vision for advanced medical prosthetics that I invested every last cent. We decided to keep my stake in the company quiet initially for practical business reasons. Then, as the years went on, we maintained the secret because it gave me a unique strategic advantage. It allowed me to see the real company culture, to understand how employees were truly treated when the C-suite wasn't watching. After Arthur's health scare, I saw a shift in Mark. The warmth in our marriage cooled to a polite distance. When I tried to talk about work, he became vague, dismissive. He started working later and later, armed with a rotating list of flimsy excuses about investor dinners and emergency production meetings I'd let myself suspect an affair, but I was too afraid of what I might find to confront him. Until that night at the office, when the truth was laid bare in the most brutal way possible. The weeks that followed were a storm of clandestine meetings that I was pointedly not invited to. My calls with Arthur became less frequent, and he sounded tired and strained whenever we spoke. The office rumor mill was buzzing with whispers of a major reorganization. I watched it all happen with a bizarre sense of detachment, as if I were watching a play whose tragic ending I had already read, and that brought me to today, to this boardroom, the grand finale of a betrayal that had been meticulously planned for months. Chloe, your position is being eliminated as part of our corporate restructuring, Mark continued, shuffling a stack of papers to avoid looking at me. The severance package is quite generous, considering your contributions over the years. Isabel slid a thick folder across the polished table toward me. Her crimson nails tapped an impatient rhythm on the cover as I made no move to pick it up. It's all standard procedure, she chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. We're just streamlining operations now that Mark has assumed full control from his father. Where is Arthur? I asked. My voice was surprisingly steady, a calm island in the sea of my inner turmoil. Dad is resting at home. Doctor's orders, Mark replied, a little too quickly. He has officially signed over all operational control, but will remain Chairman Emeritus. He trusts my vision for the company's future. I highly doubted that. Arthur and I had spoken just last week, and he had been deeply troubled by Mark's recent decisions. The corners being cut on material quality, the loyal, long-term employees being replaced by Mark's fraternity brothers, the reckless ventures he was pursuing without a shred of proper due diligence. I see, I said, finally reaching for the folder. I opened it, let my eyes scan the first page, and then closed it with a soft click. Is that everything? Mark blinked, clearly thrown by my lack of an emotional outburst. He had been expecting tears, begging, a dramatic scene. Isabel looked equally perplexed, the triumphant gleam in her eyes dimming slightly in the face of my unnerving composure. You have until 5 p.m. to clear out your office, she said, trying to regain the upper hand. Security will escort you out. I stood up, taking a moment to smooth the fabric of my skirt. That won't be necessary. I think I can find my own way out of the building I've worked in for the last 14 years. As I started to gather my personal items from the table, I could feel the collective unease of the board. These were men and women I had collaborated with on countless projects. Some I considered friends. None of them met my gaze. None of them said a word. Just one question, I said, pausing at the heavy oak door. Does Arthur know you were holding this meeting today? I saw a flicker of panic in Mark's eyes before he masked it, as I said, Dad has stepped back from the day-to-day. I'm handling things now. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. Well then, congratulations on your promotion. Mark, you too, Isabel. I imagine your new position comes with quite a few substantial benefits. Isabel flushed a deep red as the double meaning hit its mark, and I saw Mark's jaw clench in a flash of anger. I walked out of that room with my head held high, past the curious, downcast stares of my colleagues, past the office that had been my professional home for over a decade. My calm exterior was a perfect mask for the furious calculations spinning through my mind. They thought this was the end of my story. A dismissed employee, a humiliated wife, soon to be an ex. A mere footnote in the history of Sterling Dynamics. They had absolutely no idea what was coming for them. Tomorrow, I walked to my car in the executive parking garage. the small box of personal items in my hands feeling impossibly light for 14 years of memories. The security guard, a kind man named Frank who had walked me to my car on countless late nights, gave me a small, sympathetic nod. He knew better than to offer the escort Isabel had so smugly ordered. As I drove away from the Sterling Dynamics Tower, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun, my mind drifted back to the very beginning, the Biotech Innovators Summit in Boston, 16 years ago. I was fresh out of my MBA program, brimming with ambition, and still reeling from the loss of my grandparents, trying to figure out what to do with the life-changing inheritance they had left me. Arthur Sterling stood out from the crowd immediately, not because he was the loudest presenter or had the flashiest booth, but because of his quiet, intense passion. While other entrepreneurs were pitching half-baked software and dubious wellness apps, Arthur was showcasing actual working prototypes for next-generation bio-integrated prosthetics. His booth was modest, tucked away from the venture capital darlings, but his eyes blazed with conviction as he explained the technology. "The problem isn't the science," he confessed to me after I'd spent nearly an hour asking him detailed questions about his work. "It's the capital. The banks see us as too high risk, and the VCs want a controlling interest that would gut the soul of the company." We ended up talking for hours at the hotel bar that evening, sketching out supply chains and market strategies on cocktail napkins. Arthur had 2 decades of biomedical engineering experience, a small, brilliant team, and a workshop filled with incredible prototypes. What he didn't have was the financial runway to get off the ground. "My son just finished business school," he mentioned, his voice thick with pride. "Mark, he has all these fresh ideas about marketing, about distribution channels I'd never even considered." I remember being struck by the rarity of it. A father and son wanting to build something meaningful together. It resonated deeply with me. My own grandfather had always dreamed of expanding his small hardware store, but never had the capital to do it. "What if I invested?" I asked, the words tumbling out impulsively after my 3rd iced tea. "My grandparents left me their life savings. It's just sitting in a bank account while I try to figure out what to do with my life." Arthur let out a short laugh, assuming I was joking. When he saw the seriousness in my eyes, his expression shifted. "That's not an offer to be made lightly, Chloe." But it wasn't a light offer. We met again the next morning, and the one after that. He walked me through his business plans, his market research, his patent applications. By the end of the week, I was all in. $600,000, I stated, sitting across from him in his hotel room on the final day of the conference. For 49% of the company, Arthur nearly choked on his coffee. "Chloe, that's far too generous, and frankly, it's far too risky for you." I shook my head, resolute. "I've read every single page of your plan. Arthur, I believe in what you're building, but I want 51%. His face fell. "I can't give up a controlling interest, Chloe. This company, it's my life's work. I don't want day-to-day control," I clarified quickly. "I want protection. I've seen too many stories of early investors getting pushed out once a company hits the big time. We'll draft an agreement where you run the company as you see fit. Major decisions, like selling the company, will require my approval. And I want a job inside the company, something that lets me learn the business from the inside out." Arthur studied me for a long, silent moment. "You're not like any investor I've ever met. Most of them just want quarterly reports and a handsome return. I'm not most investors," I replied. "I want to help build something that matters, but I also need to protect what my grandparents worked their whole lives for." We shook hands that day, sealing a partnership that would reshape both of our futures. The first person I called was my cousin, Brenda, a shark of a corporate attorney. She thought I was certifiably insane for investing my entire inheritance in a startup, but she made damn sure the contract was ironclad. "This clause right here," she said, pointing to a paragraph during our 3rd round of revisions, "is your kill switch. It stipulates that if anyone attempts to remove you from the company without just cause, your ownership stake automatically converts to 70% of all voting shares. That seems a little extreme, doesn't it? I asked, surprised by her ferocity. Brenda fixed me with her no-nonsense lawyer stare. Family businesses get messy, Chloe, especially when there's a son who feels entitled to what his father built. Trust me on this one. You'll thank me later. I signed the papers, transferred the funds, and moved to Boston to start my new life at Sterling Dynamics as a project manager. Arthur introduced me to Mark at the company holiday party that year. The spark was instant and undeniable. When Arthur noticed our connection, he pulled me aside, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "This complicates things," he said, his expression concerned. "If you and Mark get serious, we should keep your investor status under wraps. Not forever, but until we're sure I agreed completely." My relationship with Mark was separate from my role in the business, and I was determined to earn the respect of my colleagues through my own merit, not my financial leverage. As Mark and I fell in love and eventually married, the secret became our normal. Only Arthur, Brenda, and the company's longtime accountant knew the truth. Years flew by. The company thrived. I worked my way up through middle management, always careful never to pull my hidden strings. Arthur became more than a business partner. He was a true father figure, often confiding in me about company struggles he wouldn't even discuss with Mark. About 3 years ago, those conversations began to take on a darker tone. Mark wants to switch our primary alloy supplier to cut costs, Arthur confessed during one of our monthly dinners. Says we could save nearly 20% on manufacturing. The offshore manufacturer? I asked, already familiar with the proposal I had advised against. Their quality control record is notoriously spotty. A single product recall could destroy our reputation. Arthur nodded, the lines around his eyes deepening. I built this company on reliability, Chloe on trust. It wasn't just about business decisions. Arthur worried about Mark's evolving character, his dismissive treatment of junior employees, his obsession with appearances over substance. And increasingly, he worried about Isabel. "She's ambitious," Arthur had said carefully after she was promoted to be Mark's executive assistant. "Nothing wrong with ambition, but what?" I prompted. "She reminds me of my ex-wife," he admitted, a pained look on his face. "Always looking for the angle, the advantage. I see the way she looks at Mark. I should have listened more closely to his warnings, but I was consumed with launching our new charitable division, fighting for resources against Mark's preference for flashier, more superficial marketing projects. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, my husband and I had started living separate lives, bound by a marriage license and a company name, but drifting further apart in our core values every day. After his heart attack, during a quiet moment in the hospital room, he had gripped my hand with a surprising strength. "Remember your contract, Chloe," he had whispered, his voice weak. "Brenda made sure you would be protected, no matter what." At the time, I had dismissed it as the ramblings of a man on heavy medication. Now, driving away from the office with the ruins of my career and marriage in the rearview mirror, his words echoed with chilling, prophetic clarity. I pulled into my driveway, took a single deep breath to steady myself, and made 2 phone calls. The first was to Arthur. The second was to Brenda. Tomorrow was going to be a very, very different day. I slept soundly that night, a strange, deep slumber of someone who has nothing left to lose. I woke to the relentless buzzing of my phone on the nightstand. 6 missed calls from Mark, 3 from Isabel, and a single concise text from Arthur. "It's done picking you up in 30. Have coffee ready." With a fresh mug in hand, I stood at my kitchen window and watched as Arthur's sensible sedan pulled into the driveway precisely on time. Punctuality was a virtue Arthur prized, one that Mark had unfortunately never inherited. "You look better than I expected," Arthur remarked as I slid into the passenger seat. The color had returned to his face since I'd last seen him, though the lines of fatigue around his eyes were more pronounced. "Being underestimated is a powerful advantage," I replied, taking a sip of coffee. "So, how did it go?" Arthur's knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel. Worse than I imagined, and better than they deserved. He had arrived at the office at 7 a.m., much earlier than his post-heart attack schedule allowed. Mark and Isabel were already there, celebrating their little coup with a bottle of champagne in Mark's newly expanded corner office, my former workspace now absorbed into his. I could hear them giggling from down the hall, Arthur said, his voice thick with disgust. Didn't even have the decency to close the door all the way. When I walked in, Isabel was sitting on my old desk, my desk, Chloe, with her shoes kicked off. He trailed off, too much of a gentleman to paint the rest of the tawdry picture I can imagine, I said softly. Arthur had stood in the doorway unnoticed for a full 10 seconds before he cleared his throat. "Having a party without me?" he had asked, his voice deceptively light. Mark had nearly jumped out of his chair. "Dad, you're supposed to be resting at home." "Clearly," Arthur had retorted. "So I wouldn't interfere with your brilliant new management decisions, like firing my business partner without so much as a phone call?" Isabel had scrambled off the desk, desperately trying to smooth her skirt. "Mr. Sterling, Mark was simply implementing the restructuring plan you approved." "I approved no such thing," Arthur had snapped, "and I certainly never authorized terminating Chloe." "It was a necessary business decision, Dad," Mark had insisted, slowly regaining his composure. "The severance was generous. Mom always said you were too soft on her anyway." Arthur described the white-hot fury that consumed him in that moment, a rage so intense his vision had momentarily blurred. The doctors had warned him about stress, but he couldn't contain it. "I didn't raise you to be cruel, Mark," he'd said, his voice dangerously low. "Or stupid. Did you even bother to read the founding contract before you fired her?" Mark had scoffed. "What contract?" "She's a mid-level project manager." That was when Arthur had reached into his briefcase and pulled out the folder containing the original agreement Brenda had drafted 16 years ago. "Chloe isn't just your wife, you fool. She is my partner. She is the majority owner of Sterling Dynamics." As Arthur recounted the moment of revelation, a grim smile touched his lips. "I wish you could have seen their faces, Chloe. Absolute pure shock. Isabel actually dropped her champagne flute. "You're lying," Mark had spluttered, his face ashen. "That's impossible. I would have known. Would you? You've never shown the slightest interest in the company's founding documents. You've been too busy taking credit for other people's work." Arthur had slammed the contract down on the desk. Chloe provided the startup capital that saved this company when no bank would give us the time of day. Her inheritance funded everything: the equipment, the patents, the first 3 years of operating costs. Without her, there would be no Sterling Dynamics for you to take over. "In the car?" I asked. "How did Isabel react?" Arthur snorted. "First shock, then pure calculation. That woman is a survivor. She immediately tried to paint herself as an innocent party. I was just following Mark's directives, Mr. Sterling. I had no idea about any of this." But Arthur hadn't been fooled. He'd seen the texts on Mark's phone a week ago when his son had carelessly left it on the kitchen counter. Isabel had been pushing for my termination for months, constantly feeding Mark lies and suggesting replacements for my role, always people from her own network. "Then she tried to discredit you," Arthur continued as we pulled into the company parking garage. "Claimed you'd been undermining Mark, sabotaging projects, even sharing company secrets with competitors." "That's insane," I said, genuinely stunned by the depth of their malice. "I have given everything to this company. I know that." And I told her exactly where she could stick those accusations Arthur parked in his reserved spot, which someone, undoubtedly Isabel, had already relabeled with a vinyl sticker bearing Mark's name. He peeled it off with a savage, satisfying rip. Mark had quickly shifted from denial to outright rage. "You never trusted me," he'd yelled. "You had her spying on me all these years, reporting back to you." "No, son," Arthur had replied, his voice heavy with a father's disappointment. I trusted you to earn the right to lead this company, not to steal it. Chloe never needed to spy. Your actions spoke for themselves. The confrontation had peaked when Arthur finally brought up the termination clause, the one Brenda had so brilliantly insisted on. Upon wrongful termination, my ownership stake automatically increased to 70% of all voting shares, with Arthur retaining 25%, leaving Mark with a paltry 5%. He went white as a sheet, Arthur said, cutting the engine. Started threatening lawsuits, claiming I had exerted undue influence over you. Isabel was already on her phone, probably calling some sleazy lawyer she knows Arthur had ended the screaming match by calling for an emergency board meeting at 10 a.m. That was in 20 minutes. The board needs to understand exactly what has happened, he said, and why there is a change in leadership, effective immediately. As we walked towards the main entrance, a strange sense of calm settled over me. They're going to fight this, you know. Let them try, Arthur said grimly. Brenda prepared for every possible contingency. There's even specific language in the contract covering attempted character assassination, a line which Isabel has already conveniently crossed inside the lobby. Conversation stuttered to a halt as employees saw us walk in together. News, it seemed, traveled fast. I saw a mix of confusion, concern, and, on a few faces, quiet satisfaction. I had always made a point to treat the support staff with kindness and respect, something Mark and Isabel considered beneath them. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, a shared moment of gathering strength. As the doors slid open, we were met by Isabel. Her composure was back, a mask of professionalism plastered over her panic. A fake smile stretched her lips. Mr. Sterling. Chloe, she said, her voice smooth as silk. The board is assembling. Mark asked me to escort you both in. I know the way to the boardroom I helped pay for. Thank you, I replied, my voice quiet but firm. Isabel's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Mark has prepared a counter-proposal. I think you'll find it's quite reasonable. A graceful exit for all parties involved. Arthur laughed, a short, harsh sound that echoed in the hallway. The only exits happening today, young lady, will be yours and his, if you continue this pathetic charade. Isabel's eyes narrowed, her mask finally slipping to reveal the venom beneath. Don't be so sure, old man. Things have changed. This board respects Mark's vision, not your outdated, sentimental management style. As we neared the boardroom, we could hear Mark's voice, urgent and persuasive, already trying to spin his narrative to the board members. Arthur put a hand on my shoulder. Ready? I straightened my spine and nodded. I've been ready for 16 years. We pushed open the doors together and stepped directly into the storm. The boardroom became dead silent the moment we walked in. 8 pairs of eyes swiveled in our direction. 5 board members, Mark, Isabel, and a junior lawyer from the legal department named Martha, who was frantically shuffling through a thick stack of documents. Mark stood at the head of the table, my contract illuminated on the large screen behind him, with specific clauses highlighted in an angry, accusatory red. Nice of you to join us, he said, his voice strained. I was just explaining to the board how this outdated agreement has been superseded by more recent corporate governance documents. I walked past him and took a seat directly across the table, not in my usual spot 3 chairs down, the seat of a manager, but in the seat of power. The board members looked from me to Mark, their expressions a mixture of confusion and profound discomfort. None of them had ever known I was anything more than Mark's wife, and a dedicated, if quiet, employee. Martha, I said calmly to the young lawyer, you might want to place a call to Brenda Vance at Vance Associates. She drafted the original agreement and every subsequent amendment she's expecting you. Martha shot a nervous glance at Mark, who gave a barely perceptible curt nod. As she scurried out of the room to make the call, Arthur placed his own thick folder on the center of the table. While we wait for proper legal clarification, he announced, his voice resonating with authority, I believe we should address the primary reason for this emergency meeting. the improper and unauthorized termination of a founding partner. What unfolded over the next 3 hours was the most intense corporate battle I had ever witnessed. Brenda joined via conference call, her voice a precise and lethal instrument, dismantling every one of Mark's desperate legal arguments one by one. By the time the meeting concluded, the board, faced with irrefutable legal facts, had no choice but to acknowledge my 70% majority ownership and formally rescind my termination. "This isn't over," Mark hissed at me as the defeated board members filed out of the room. Isabel had already vanished, presumably to clear her desk before security could do it for her. "You're right about that," I replied quietly. That tense boardroom showdown was 2 weeks ago. Since then, I had barricaded myself in my home office, a room we had once planned as a nursery before we learned we couldn't have children. Now, the walls were a collage of organizational charts, financial reports, and a rainbow of sticky notes detailing the shocking irregularities I was uncovering as I combed through the company's records. Being underestimated for so long had given me a unique advantage. As a mere employee, I had been privy to conversations and granted access to systems that now revealed the true, rotten state of Sterling Dynamics. With the full executive access the board had granted me, I was discovering just how deep the decay had spread under Mark's unsupervised influence. He funneled nearly $1 million in development funds to his college roommate's failing startup, I told Arthur during one of our late-night strategy sessions, spreading the documents across my dining room table. The agreement claims we received exclusive software licensing rights, but the technology was never delivered. Arthur shook his head in disgust, his eyes scanning the falsified invoices. Nathan Forsyth. Mark was always convinced that guy was the next Bill Gates. How did I miss this? It was buried deep in the RD budget, listed as external consultation fees. And there's more. I handed him another file. Isabel's brother was hired last year as a senior sales consultant. His salary is $200,000 a year, plus commission. According to the HR records, he hasn't closed a single new account. Night after night, we pieced together a deeply disturbing picture. Mark had been systematically replacing experienced, valuable staff with his own friends and cronies, creating a network of loyalty built not on merit, but on mutual back-scratching. Quality control reports had been doctored. Serious customer complaints had been buried. Financial projections had been wildly inflated to justify obscene executive bonuses. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Mark, their tone shifting from threatening to cajoling, and finally to pure desperation. "You're making a huge mistake, Chloe. We can fix this. Whatever Dad is paying you to do this, I'll double it. Chloe, please. 14 years of marriage has to count for something. Just meet me for coffee. Hear my side of the story." I ignored them all, letting them pile up in my voicemail, and focused instead on building the coalition I would need for the fight ahead. My first call was to Diane in accounting, a wonderful woman who had been with the company since its inception. She had been sidelined as Mark outsourced key functions to a firm run by one of his former classmates. "I've been keeping my own set of books," she confided when I invited her for coffee at a small cafe far from the office. She discreetly slid a flash drive across the table, discrepancies between reported expenditures and actual payments. I thought I was just being paranoid until you called. Next came Leo from the engineering department, a brilliant mind who was passed over for a promotion when Mark brought in Isabel's unqualified cousin. The new safety protocols were shelved, he revealed during our discreet meeting in a park. The ones you championed last year. Isabel said they were cost prohibitive, and she had Mark sign off on using the bare minimum legal standards. Instead, one by one, I connected with the honest, hardworking employees who had been marginalized or silenced under Mark's regime. Each one held a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of evidence proving corners had been cut and the company's integrity had been compromised. "You've built your own little intelligence network," Arthur observed one evening, clearly impressed by my methodical approach. "I never realized how many people here were loyal to you, not to me," I corrected him gently. "To the company's core values, the ones you instilled from the very beginning." In our third week of this deep dive investigation, Arthur dropped his own bombshell. "Mark has been meeting with Apex Biomedical. I had a contact in our legal department follow up on a rumor. They're discussing acquisition terms. My blood ran cold. Apex was our biggest and most ruthless competitor, notorious for acquiring companies, stripping them of their assets, and laying off the entire workforce. He can't sell the company without our approval. He's trying to leverage his position as CEO to force our hand," Arthur explained, looking utterly exhausted. "He's going to claim that without this deal, the company will fail. Some of the board members are getting nervous." That night, long after Arthur had gone home, I sat alone in my office, staring at the mountain of evidence we had gathered. My phone buzzed. It was Mark's 19th call of the day. This time I answered. "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, my voice flat. "Dinner." "Just dinner, Chloe," he pleaded, his voice stripped of all its usual arrogance. "The Preston Hotel. Private dining room. I'll come alone." I should have said no, but a morbid curiosity got the better of me. "Tomorrow, 7 o'clock, and I'm bringing someone from my legal team." "Fine." "Whatever you need," he said, sounding relieved. He paused. "Thank you for at least talking to me." I hung up without another word and immediately called Arthur. "Mark wants to meet." "It's a trap, Chloe," he warned instantly. "Of course it is," I agreed, "but I want to hear what he has to say. Whatever he's offering will tell me what he's most afraid of us finding." We spent the rest of the night preparing, gaming out every possible scenario and anticipating every desperate move he might make. By dawn, I had our final strategy outlined. I showered and dressed with purpose, selecting a sharp conservative navy suit I hadn't worn since the day I was fired. In my briefcase, I placed a single slender folder. It contained the documents that would decide the future of Sterling Dynamics and all the people who had dedicated their lives to building it. Whatever happened at this dinner, Mark was about to learn that underestimating me was the most catastrophic mistake of his life. The private dining room at the Preston Hotel was a picture of understated luxury, muted tones, soft lighting, and a table meticulously set for 3. Only Mark was there when I arrived. No sign of Isabel. My attorney, Rebecca Chin, a sharp-as-a-tack colleague of Brenda's specializing in corporate fraud, accompanied me, her tablet and a small recorder at the ready. "Thank you for coming," Mark said, standing awkwardly as we entered. The commanding, arrogant executive was gone. In his place was a smaller, diminished man. His designer suit seemed to hang off his frame, and dark circles shadowed his tired eyes. "You requested the meeting, Mark," I reminded him. Taking a seat directly across from him, I'm listening. Rebecca placed her tablet on the table, the recording app visibly active. Mark glanced at it nervously before sliding a folder across the table toward me. "It's a settlement offer," he began. "I retain operational control as CEO. You and Dad get full financial oversight. We bring in a third-party independent auditor that we all agree on. We stop these internal investigations, agree to move forward as a united front, and protect the company's reputation." I opened the folder, skimmed the first page, and closed it again. "And Isabel?" His expression tightened. "She'll be repositioned. Maybe to external relations. She has valuable connections." "No," I interrupted, my voice cutting through his proposal. "That's not going to work." Mark leaned forward, a desperate edge creeping into his voice. "Chloe, be reasonable. Think about what a public fight will do to the company, to the Sterling name." "I've thought about little else for the past 3 weeks," I replied calmly. I opened my briefcase and took out my own folder. "This is my counteroffer." He took the document from my hand, his face growing paler with every page he turned. "This is..." "You can't be serious." "I am completely serious," I said. A full forensic audit of the company has already begun. The preliminary findings are detailed on page 4. Rebecca tapped her tablet. The audit team has already identified over $2.5 million in misappropriated funds, Mark. That document outlines the terms under which Sterling Dynamics will agree not to pursue criminal charges. Mark's hands trembled as he set the papers down on the table. This would destroy me. You did that to yourself, I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. I'm offering you a way to walk away with your freedom and enough money to start over. It's more than you were willing to offer me. The waiter arrived with our meals. They sat on the table, untouched and growing cold, as Mark wrestled with the crushing weight of the inevitable. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes pleading. What about us? 14 years, Chloe. For a fleeting moment, I felt a ghost of the connection we once had. Two ambitious young people dreaming of building a life together. Then I remembered Isabel's triumphant smirk as I was cast out of the boardroom. Sign the agreement, Mark, or our next conversation can be with the district attorney present. 3 days later, I walked through the main doors of Sterling Dynamics as the acting chief executive officer. The press release had been sent out that morning, Mark Sterling stepping down for personal reasons. Chloe Sterling assuming leadership during transitional period, Arthur Sterling to return as chairman of the board. The receptionist's eyes widened in surprise as I approached her desk. Mrs. Sterling, Chloe, welcome back. Thank you, Diane, I said warmly. How's your son doing in his first year at university? Her shock at being remembered by name melted into a genuine, brilliant smile. He made the dean's list last semester. That scholarship program you started, it made all the difference for us. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt completely different this time. Employees nodded at me with a newfound respect. Some offered quiet, sincere congratulations. The whispers that followed me down the hall were filled with curiosity. Not pity, Arthur was waiting for me in the CEO's office. Mark's office until yesterday. My office now. The space had already been transformed. Gone were the pretentious, abstract art pieces Mark had insisted projected success. The massive desk had been reoriented to face the door, a symbol of openness rather than the skyline, a symbol of status. The facilities team worked through the night, Arthur explained, a proud smile on his face. They said they wanted it to be ready for your first day. I noticed familiar touches everywhere. My old potted plants rescued from storage, the framed photos of my family that I'd kept in my smaller, mid-level office. And in place of Mark's cold, ergonomic throne was the worn leather chair I had always found more comfortable first order of business, I said, settling in behind the desk that finally felt like it was mine. The department heads are waiting in the main conference room. The meeting that followed set a new tone for Sterling Dynamics. The findings of the forensic audit were presented with stark, unflinching transparency. The misappropriated funds, the systemic nepotism, the dangerous and unethical corner-cutting in quality control. There was no attempt to hide or minimize the damage Mark had done. We are going to fix this, I told the room of shocked executives, together. And we are starting with a complete restructuring that rewards merit, not connections. Leo from engineering was promoted to Chief Technology Officer. Replacing Mark's fraternity brother, who had missed 6 critical product deadlines, Diane became the new Chief Financial Officer. Her decades of institutional knowledge and unwavering integrity finally recognized and rewarded. Throughout the entire organization, talented, dedicated employees who had been overlooked and undervalued were elevated to positions where they could make a real, meaningful contribution. By the end of my first week, the change in the company's atmosphere was palpable. A new energy buzzed through the hallways. Ideas flowed freely in meetings where people had once been too afraid to speak up, terrified of contradicting Mark or one of Isabel's favorites. I have never seen morale rebound this quickly, Arthur commented as we reviewed the week's progress reports. The board is thrilled. Even the members who were skeptical are coming around. People want to do good work, I replied simply. They just need to be given an environment where they can. The final, inevitable confrontation came unexpectedly. I was working late, going over new production schedules, when my office door burst open. Isabel stood there, her mascara streaked, clutching a ridiculously expensive handbag like a life raft. "You got what you wanted," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "Mark's leaving the country. He says he can't face the humiliation." I calmly set down my pen. "That was his choice, Isabel. The agreement only required his resignation. You destroyed him, after everything he did for this company." "And what exactly was that, Isabel?" I asked. "Besides taking credit for other people's work and funneling company money to his friends?" She faltered, her anger momentarily giving way to a flicker of uncertainty. "He had a vision." "No," I corrected her gently. "He had ambition. There's a very big difference." Isabel's fight seemed to drain out of her all at once, and she sank into the chair opposite my desk, suddenly deflated. "What happens to me now?" "That depends," I said. "The audit shows you received over $200,000 in improper bonuses and authorized the hiring of 3 of your family members for non-existent positions. You can repay the money and resign quietly, or we can proceed with legal action." Her entire facade crumbled. "I can't repay that kind of money. It's gone." "Then you have a difficult road ahead of you," I said, not without a sliver of pity. I slid a business card across the desk. "This attorney specializes in financial restitution cases. She can help you structure a repayment plan that might keep you out of prison." After she stumbled out of my office, Arthur appeared in the doorway. "You heard all that?" I asked. He nodded. Security gave me a heads up when she arrived. He came in, closing the door softly behind him. "You could have had her arrested, Chloe." "To what end?" I said, looking out at the glittering city lights. "She's already lost everything that ever mattered to her. Status, power, and Mark. Some lessons," I shrugged, "have to be learned the hard way." Arthur stood beside me, studying my reflection in the glass with a newfound respect. "When did you become so wise?" "Somewhere between being fired by my husband and discovering I owned the whole company," I replied with a small, weary smile. As we stood there, looking out over the city, Arthur placed a hand on my shoulder. "You know," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I always hoped Mark would one day grow into the kind of leader this company deserved. Turns out she was here all along." The sterling dynamics that emerged from the ashes of that betrayal was stronger, more ethical, and more innovative than it had ever been. The passion projects I had championed for years, sustainable materials, robust employee development programs, and a commitment to ethical manufacturing, became the new cornerstones of our brand. Sometimes, late at night in my office, I would find myself wondering about Mark and about the life we were supposed to have built together. But those moments became rarer with each passing day, replaced by the deep satisfaction of watching Sterling Dynamics flourish under its new, honest leadership. Some people might have called it revenge. I preferred to think of it as a restoration of values, of purpose, and of potential. The company hadn't just survived a betrayal, it had been reborn because of it. And so had I. The end of the story.